In my previous video, I spoke about the health trajectory of my grandmother, which I felt based on some of her symptoms were coming from arsenic poisoning. And there were other sources of arsenic poisoning apart from rice, also, that was present in her life at that time because at that time in the village area that they lived, because they had been raised in simpler living patterns during that time, the cleaning activities in home used to be done with less chemicals, and they would only usually use the incense stick ashes or the soil that they had on their land for cleaning utensils. And they would use coconut, the copra of the coconut, the fiber that is there outside the coconut shell. That fiber would be used for scrubbing our vessels. Now, this is actually one of the cleanest way of cleaning our vessels, but only if our soil is clean and unpolluted. And it is a good way to clean if even the incense sticks that are used while praying and the ash that remains afterwards, that is a good cleansing agent for washing dishes. But when the source of the wood and other plant extracts used for making the incense sticks is also clean and not chemically or artificially infused, because any kind of chemical, if it is harmful for our health, and if that chemical after being burnt still remains harmful, that chemical, then if you are washing your dishes with it, might have micro quantities of that chemical coming back into our food. Same way with any soil, if we use for cleaning our dishes, if our soil has gone contaminated from air pollution in the industrial or other work being done in the area, or the soil is polluted just from the chemicals in the food that are getting consumed by the people in the area, because in villages or even in towns like Udaipur, or even in cities like Goan cities, there are many places of India where the water that people use in their daily life comes from their underground water sources and natural water sources. But our natural water sources, which comes after rainwater collection in a well or a rainwater harvesting unit, or the natural water that someone digs up from their underground water system, it can only remain pure if every human in that area is doing pure and clean water conservation activities that keeps our water pure and clean. If any one person, also any one factory comes up in that area, any one industrial zone starts happening, any kind of farming starts happening that is using a lot of pesticides and chemicals, any kind of building and construction activity starts happening which use woods and other construction material, all of which are now coming from some harmful chemical sources in them, then all of these one by one add up to the air, water, and soil pollution of that area. And slowly over time, the soil pollution in anyone's home, like the village area where my village town like area where my uncle lived, their house was such that most of the soil pollution that is happening first will happen from their own at home activities. Then some additional soil pollution would happen. Now in recent times there is a factory that has come up in just the next door plot of our uncle's land. So now the soil pollution is also happening from the factory work. But it's not just the soil pollution, the soil, water, and air is getting involved because factories have more effluents coming out of their factory work. Likewise, any other water related pollution before this factory came up. There was just a green patch of land near there, but on the other sides of the road or other neighborhood of the same family home, there were other smaller homes who were doing chemical activities, who were doing more normal cleaning activities, normal cooking activities. But whatever source of food these people have access to, if there are any chemical contamination in those sources of food, from farming activities to transportation activities to selling activities, any kind of chemical that is present in our food, present in our clothing, once we start washing it, or when we wash it and use some chemicals to wash it, all of it after getting washed goes where the drainage systems in these villages and towns are usually draining all the cleanliness related, hygiene related, washed out effluents also is going into the soil and then underneath into the water table. So slowly over time the water table starts getting contaminated, slowly over time the soil starts getting contaminated. The same piece of land, when my grandmother was alive around 30-40 years back, when I used to visit them as a child, I have seen much more abundant flowering plants, much more abundant and flourishing fruit trees also on the same land, which now over the 30-40 years of human activities led pollution of the land has now started causing only smaller orchid like plants or less abundant fruits from coming up in this land, because now the land doesn't have enough nutritional supplement to and it doesn't have enough cleanliness to support the flourishing of larger trees, support the flourishing of, it's not that there still isn't some larger trees present in the same land, but where the parts where the chemical activities are less in the land, less in the water, that place, those places have a little bit more flourishing of plants and trees, whereas the parts of the same home where more cleaning activities are going on, in that area now some lesser abundant trees and plants are growing. And this land is still not yet unfertile because some organic because they still live in village area, their access to some cleaner foods are still a lot more than someone who lives closer to a who lives in a city or lives closer to a city. So the land is not yet completely destroyed, but the way to preserve this land from getting destroyed would be to realize that the quality of food we are consuming and the quality of chemicals in the food that we are consuming can have a health impact, which doesn't show up the first day we start getting exposed to these micro levels of arsenic in our food or other arsenic in our other activities, because arsenic I saw can be found even in smoking tobacco. Why? Because again, tobacco being a very common crop that is mined in different which is cultivated in different countries. Again, tobacco is also subject to the same pesticides that rice may be subject to, and not just pesticides but other chemicals too. So whatever chemicals are being used for raising that tobacco, that then is, and the paper, both of which are then used for making your cigarette, now then has the potential when it is getting burnt to emit out the smoke and toxins that are harmful to your health. So breathing that also will cause first, when we breathe, we are not just breathing from through our nose, some of us also breathe through our mouth. So if anyone is inhaling tobacco and cigarettes near us, that tobacco smoke inhalation also impacts our health, which is what was my grandmother's problem, because she lives in West Bengal where many people smoke cigarettes. Now then, there is another factor which was impacting her exposure to arsenic, which was coming from wood smoke. Now, because she lives in villages, and because at that time they were using something called a chulha like thing, which looks like a bucket, and it's a mud bucket in which in the bottom part you would add some wood, coal, newspaper, and they would burn that to get the fire going. And some cooking used to be done in that for at least 20 years of their life. They did that kind of cooking, or more than 20 years. I observed it for their 15-20 years of their life, where my grandmother and grandfather used to do this method of cooking. Only after my aunt came to the family, they started using gas for cooking. But until then, whatever wood smoke they were using, coal they were burning, newspapers they were burning, any chemicals, artificial chemicals in the wood, in the paper, whatever was burnt, if they had some chemical contamination in them, which again arises only when these wood sources, if bought from a store, again is being cultivated by using a lot of artificial chemicals, then the chemical content and pesticide content and arsenic content from this wood is also high, which is a result when being burnt. Or the papers which come from a wood source, again if they have some arsenic in them, all of these combined together again adds to the smoke that is coming from the wood. And the woman, being the cook of the family, the main cook of the family, she is always inhaling more. And again, when inhaling more, it is going both into her esophageal tract as well as her respiratory tract, because of which her primary symptoms of health issues came in the throat to stomach region of her body, of her gastrointestinal tract got impacted the most. But there was another family member who also got impacted from the arsenic in their environment and in their daily lifestyle choice. That was her husband, my grandfather, who doesn't have any genetic links or commonalities with my grandmother. But even then, because they are both environmentally living and doing the same activities, and they have been doing that for at least 60-70 years of their life together, both of them got the exposure to the same arsenic, but in a different manner, because of the chores they used to do. So for my grandfather, his chores they used to do, or the lifestyle they led. So what happened to my grandfather before he died, which was a couple of years after my grandmother died, is that his symptoms before death had intense diarrhea and bowel movement failure. Now arsenic can cause that as well, because if you are again, he was not the one who would always eat the bottom part of the rice from the cooking, because him being the eldest in the family, he was eating first, but he used to consume a lot of rice. As a result, his arsenic content was coming from the mass consumption of rice. And then he was also a little bit more active person than my grandmother, so his digestion was, because of that, a little bit more faster than my grandmother's. Because he's not sitting down or lying down or sleeping or taking naps, he is more active in doing some gardening activities or doing the heavy lifting activities. Whatever he was doing, for him, his bowel movement problems happened from the intestine region onwards. Because if he is eating a lot of rice, and those larger quantities of rice had the particles of arsenic in them, they are now getting digested by his stomach, but because he's doing activities, and they're getting digested by his intestines too, but they are also getting largely absorbed in his intestinal regions. And because of it getting absorbed largely in his intestinal regions, he had more of the diarrhea related symptoms coming up in later stages of his life. And he was also involved in doing the inhalation via the wood smoke, because he was the one who would usually start the fire before the cooking would start. And by the time he passed away, the change from using a chulha to using a gas was just barely starting in our family. So there were also many cooking changes that would have been introduced, and because my grandmother had passed away and my aunt had now started taking over the cooking chores, some of the duties and changes that she brought into the home, they also could have added more to the chemical contaminations in the water supply, in the food supply of the homes. And it's not a deliberate contamination any one of us is doing, but it is now time that most human beings wake up that our daily activities are responsible for our health impact over time, because our daily activities impact the quality of air, water, food, clothing, and anything that we are doing in our daily life. So, this is how this side of the family passed away after suffering from things that people already know, that arsenic is present in all these things. But when we go to a doctor, most of us are going to a doctor for symptomatic treatment. No one goes to a doctor or thinks about reflecting on what is there in our lifestyle choices that are impacting our health. So as a result, even though he was also hospitalized, even though he also got treatment from the doctors in that area, that treatment was not enough to keep him alive, because the supporting factors that are needed for him to stay alive were not there. For arsenic poisoning, first, for both of them, arsenic poisoning is happening, had to be detected. But that knowledge, even though it was prevalent in the knowledge sphere of common man too, that arsenic is found in the food here and found in tobacco smoke, all these are common knowledge or generally known knowledge that some people can have. But even though if we have the knowledge, if we don't have the connecting element to connect and correlate the knowledge with our daily practices, then just having knowledge is of no value. Even though the doctors there might know that arsenic poison can be there in our food, but if you don't correlate that daily use of that arsenic in our food can impact and cause arsenic poisoning, then our knowledge is not transferred into a more evolved level, which is where now people have to start evolving and understanding their own health, because earth pollution is at a high level everywhere on earth, not simply in our homes, not simply in a village, not simply in a city. It is a global problem, and if it wasn't a global problem, we wouldn't have had so many people die from the pandemic or so many people get severely hospitalized from the pandemic. Because again, the virus that caused the pandemic was the last straw in the, the saying that says, this straw that breaks the camel's back. Coronavirus is that straw that broke the human body of those people who died or those who got severely hospitalized. But after getting severely, those who didn't die, those who were either mildly suffering from it or moderately suffering from the coronavirus, or had been hospitalized but now they are recovering at home, some of those patients still complain of body aches and pain. Some of those patients still complain about skin irritation and other health issues, or they are having brain fog, or they are having emotional connectivity based issues. All these issues can crop up again from poisoning related to chemicals in our daily environment. And it's not the poisoning where, this term poisoning, I keep using the term poisoning because the symptoms correlate to poisoning, but it is not like a deliberate poisoning or a deliberate suicide attempt where someone takes and consumes a large amount of something. Here the poisoning is a slow poisoning. It's slowly developing in your body as little bit of chemicals are accumulating in your body. And the first 5, 10, 20 years of your life, it may not impact your health, but it has started impacting the health of people who are in their midlife, who are the midlife to the elderly people more. Why? Because after having lived on earth for 30, 40 years or 70, 80 years, in that whole time span of your earth's life cycle, all of us have accumulated multiple chemicals from multiple sources. And when the chemicals are at a level where the body is able to clear it out via the body's normal systems of eliminating toxins, we stay healthy. But by the time some of these chemicals start binding to our organs and binding to our some organ system functioning, or preventing our normal organ systems from functioning their normal ways, all these things then slowly start causing some organ systems to stop working at an optimal level. So if my liver starts getting damaged, if my lungs and cardiovascular system is starting to get damaged, if my circulatory system is starting to get damaged, some of the normal cleaning activities that will remove these toxins from my body is now slowing down. And when it starts slowing down, or when it gets completely damaged and is like at near organ failure levels, organ damage levels, where no healthy organs are available to do that function, then what will happen? That's when our body starts failing. That's when we suddenly either get a cardiac arrest, respiratory arrest, liver failure, or we die in our sleep, or we get something that shows up as a symptom which gets treated in a hospital. But the main internal causes, if we don't change those internal causes of that organ damage or organ failure or health decline or cancer from continuing, if it keeps continuing in our lives, our health even after treatment will go into a decline zone only. It might be a slow decline or fast decline, depending on how many measures supporting our health are present in our life at that time. And quality of life and quality of health is not simply dependent on what food we eat, what clothes we wear, what water we drink, what air we breathe. It is also dependent on the quality of the people we are interacting with, quality of our social connections we have in our life, quality of what we ourselves do to keep our spirits up, our spirituality up, our health up. All these things determine the quality of the health and trajectory of someone. Now I'm going to talk about the other side of my family, which was from my mother's side. In that family, we had multiple doctors also in our family. Doctors staying with my grandmother and grandfather while they were undergoing their health crisis, or the simple things that were happening to their health that were indicative of their slow health decline already happening to them. It's just again with them also, even though they had an internal medicine doctor, even though one of my my aunt was a child specialist, they were doctors who treated people with weakened health regularly, so they knew about medicine. They had doctor friends to whom they could take my grandparents for treatment, or ask their friends to come over to help with the treatment of both these patients. But despite that, they both had a health trajectory. One had a very painful health trajectory and one had a slightly less painful health trajectory, but both of their conditions that supported their death were present in their life even decades before they died. And what were these conditions? For my other grandfather, I had only recently correlated some of his symptoms with my health symptoms, and now I understand what was going on with him, as I am going through some of the same things that he went through. And not just with my grandfather, it was also something my mother was also going through. But with my mother and me and my grandfather, some different things happened, because we are different generations, we lived in different cities, we've lived in different countries, so different things impacted our health. My grandfather had lived for a few years outside India as well, and for my grandfather, what happened was, a few years before his death, when I was a kid, he died when I was 21 or something. I was 21, and for the last 5-6 years before his death, I wasn't really, we weren't really visiting them as much, because all of us had our 10th exams, 12th exams in our family. Many of us cousins were in the same age range, so we all having had exams coming up, we weren't interacting so much with this grandfather. But even then, almost 10 years before his death, when I was a small child of 10 12 years. At that time, I had observed my grandfather was very prone to using a back scratcher for his skin irritation problem. Now, this skin irritation problem that had manifested 10 years before, 10 to 15 years before his death, was a chronic health issue for him. But because it was a simple skin irritation, all he did to alleviate his symptoms was that he got a back scratcher for himself, and that is what he would use regularly. Sometimes during our vacations, when we were younger kids, once or twice I have also slept in the same bed as my grandparents. So, in one of those sleeping times with my grandparents, even I had some skin irritation issues from the blankets we used. It was winter time, and we used to use these India. We have these kambals that you get in the trains. Those kambals were used. Those kind of woolen blankets were used at home. Now, those woolen blankets itself, if you have ever traveled in train, and I have traveled a lot in Indian trains, so those woolen blanket fibers, if those woolen blankets are from natural or unnatural sources, it doesn't matter, but the fibers in them can cause our skin irritation if our skin is sensitized to something going on in our health, or if there are chemicals in those fibers. So in our homes, though, even if we use such blankets that are available in our trains, most Indian homes or Bengali homes, when we use these blankets, we also have a covering to that blanket. So while the blanket is only aired usually in our homes by keeping it out in the hot sun during summer times to ensure that the blanket stays, damp free, mold free and clean, we don't usually wash those blankets. What we do wash is the external cover, the white covering of these blankets. Now, these white covering of these blankets also are getting cleaned regularly after winter time has passed, and Kolkata has much more stronger winter than Bombay. So we use these blankets for at least 2-3 months. So during those months of winter time when these blankets are used, the covering is cleaned regularly. So the skin irritation that was happening to my grandfather, which he never expressed why he got his skin irritation, because he never figured out what was causing his skin irritation. My mother also had some skin irritation problem going on. Again, she didn't verbally express that she was having a skin irritation problem, but it was from her choices that I understood she was having a skin irritation problem. And the same choices and the same thing that my grandfather and my mother did, I was doing in recent years when I had heightened skin irritation problem. So I was like my grandfather, since I have observed my grandfather use a back scratcher for his back skin irritation and allergic responses, where he feels like scratching his skin. Like how he used to use a back scratcher, I also have a back scratcher. And if I don't have the access to the back scratcher, because I sometimes live in other places, so at that time I would just make a temporary back scratcher of a knitting needle or something. So that way I understood, oh, I'm also doing the same thing that my grandfather used to do, and I know currently what is causing my skin irritation problems. So now I can correlate that the same things that were impacting my health, some of those same conditions were present in my grandfather's life also. That's why now I correlate that his back scratching or skin irritation problem could have arisen from detergent allergies, soap allergies, allergies to anything that would have been present in their water while they were taking shower. Because these are the 3 places that I got my skin allergies from, and then the additional place where I'm getting my skin allergies from is from the shampoo, or if I used some henna dyes, or if I used some artificial dyes for coloring my hair, or if I used makeup on my skin, if I used some other cosmetic products on my skin like body lotions, if I used shampoos, all these additional chemicals that my grandfather didn't use but I use. are all responsible for my chemical problems from water pollution and chemical problems from the chemicals that I'm using to keep my body clean or hygienic or fashionable, right? So were there at least still 30-40% items that my grandfather also used regularly, that I am also still using regularly, that are responsible for our skin irritation issues, right? So if someone says that what you have correlated is a false correlation, that is a false belief system, because earth pollution has only increasingly increased in our lifestyles and in our choices than decreased. And again, I may have traveled from city to city and never lived in any home for more than 5-6 years, but maximum home where we lived the longest was in my when my dad was posted in his government job. Even there we moved a little, but in that one home, the home where I have stayed the longest is a home where we stayed there for about 15 years of our life, 15 or maybe 13 years. So in those 13 years, but for my grandfather, he had been staying in this home for at least, I believe, 20-30 years. So whatever number of years he has lived, maybe if I'm wrong that he has lived 30 years, let's say he has only lived in this home for 20 years. So in those 20 years also that he lived in this home, again they lived in a bungalow like place in a place called Salt Lake in Kolkata. And in Salt Lake there is a lot of greenery present in Salt Lake compared to Mumbai homes. But despite the greenery present in that area, trees are doing their job to give us oxygen. Trees are also trying to keep some environmental factors in clean ways, by balancing nature in some clean ways. Because if trees have to live in I don't know how to explain this, maybe in a next video I will talk about this trees life cycle, but trees have an important role in keeping the earth clean in many ways. But not just tree, but the ecosystem surrounding trees have to do that. So even though there are a lot of green trees in that area, human activities again in that area are causing the decline in health of not just the trees, the humans and other ecosystem of that area, because of these chemical activities that we do regularly for washing our clothes, for cleaning our bodies, again from cooking also. Their water supply was also getting impacted. They also had a underground water pump that was pumping water to them. They also had a septic tank problem which developed after 20 years of living there, because that whatever human activities are going on, that family had around how many members used to live? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 people used to 9 people used to live in that home. And all the human activities of the 9 children and adults living there impacted the quality of the water, quality of whatever sewage is generated. They are all accumulating there. If there are not enough trees to absorb the not right amount of soil, and not enough trees to absorb this sewage, what will happen is that sewage can't get converted into fertilizer or other soil elements, because you need the right soil composition, right bacteria in the soil, right amount of bacteria in the soil, right amount of soil itself in proportion to the humans. You also need right amount of insects in the soil, all of which combined will help in any kind of human wastage that is created, or vegetable waste that is created, that gets buried inside the soil. All of these can't be utilized the right way by the soil for making nutrients if the right bacteria and insects are not present in the soil. And when humans are living in cities or villages or any other homes, we tend to have this dislike of insects, because of which we are always spraying insecticides even in our homes, even when we are not doing farming. Even if someone is doing gardening, people don't like insects around their plants, because of which all these insects that are developing, which are possibly needed to help keep some balance in that area, help the ecosystem be in balance. More insects are usually coming up in any area when that quality of the soil in that area, quality of water in that area has gone down. That is when you will see insects come up from the soil outside or come away from the trees outside and try to get into our homes. Otherwise, insects are least bothered about humans if they have the right nutrients from the trees and plants, if they have the right nutrients underneath the soil, they will not come and bother humans. But this part humans don't realize, and we use more and more chemicals, which then again adds to more and more chemical contamination of the soil and the water in the soil, which then prevents the bacteria and insects from doing their job, which then prevents this septic backup happening. Or it can, because there is not enough clean soil, not enough bacteria and other bugs in the soil to do their purpose and do their work. Or if there aren't enough trees that will use up these nutrients now, though if those trees are also not present, then again there is a problem. Or if humans are eating a lot of food, like this family used to eat a lot of meat products too. Now if you're eating a lot of meat products, and if those meat products have a lot of bacteria and other contaminations in them, because even if we cook our food or everything, you can still invariably get, if you're eating some outside food also, because our family Bengalis used to love eating outside food. So if you're eating outside food, like momos, which have non-vegetarian momos, plenty of non-vegetarian options are present in Bengal. So now all these non-vegetarian foods, even if at home people are cooking with care, if you're buying it from someone who's not cooking it with care, what will happen is the parasites and bacteria in those foods are now going into your stomach. Those parasites and bacteria from your stomach then goes into your septic tank. From there, if that septic tank underneath the soil is not, it turns septic only when the harmful bacteria and parasites are more, and the beneficial bacteria, parasites and other soil fertilizing creatures, if they are absent now from your soil, they will not be able to kill these harmful bacteria and parasites, because of which the septic buildup will not get disintegrated and destroyed. There is not enough things to counteract this septic buildup, and which is what happened to them. So now what they had to do was they had to call a plumber or someone who works with this septic tank issues to clean that home. But until the plumber comes and until they detected that this problem is cropping up in that home, will the water supply of that home have some cross contamination? Will the water supply have simply cross contamination from the sewage, or also from the cleaning activities, makeup related activities? Because this family had women who love to do some makeup, and all of us grew up with using a lot of makeup. When we were teenagers, we started doing that. So all this makeup and other things that people are using for colognes, deodorants, whatever we are spraying in our body, it doesn't simply stay in our body. Some of it stays in our body, but some of it gets washed off from our body when we are taking a shower, or eliminated via our other elimination systems. So all these chemicals are also piling up in their land, and hence into their water supply. And general tendency of all humans is that we are using that water for our cleaning, cooking, washing, right? None of us have. Very slowly now, over time, my family started using the RO water systems and using the filtration systems, to AquaGuard like system, Pureit like system, to get the water filtered out before cooking. But even then, if you had cooks in the home or people who are doing quick cooking, rapid cooking, even though we might be drinking the RO water, many people forget to cook in that RO water. And now because of all these reasons, what happened to my grandfather was, he had skin allergy symptoms which were showing that something chemically in his lifestyle choices is irritating his skin, it is harmful to his skin. But the milder treatments were only given to him at that time, because it seemed like a minor skin issue. But internally, these same chemicals are also responsible for causing internal organ damage, because the way it irritates our skin on the outside, same way if these chemicals are present in our body and have been absorbed in our body via the shower we took or the food we cooked with the chemical contaminated water, what will happen is some of it is also getting absorbed inside when we have cooked something and eaten something, or it is getting absorbed via our skin into our internal circulatory system later on. So from the circulatory system, these chemicals of just the simple soaps, shampoos, detergents that were being used by him majorly, these simple things only were, and then slowly over time maybe some additional deodorants and body sprays were added into the mix by other family members, or lotions, all these that are getting washed away and into the underground water supply, they are present in their water. Now it's causing skin irritation to him, because maybe he was the most sensitive to the skin irritation aspect. But was it also causing internal damage to other people? Yes, other people were also showing some damage. My grandmother and grandfather, they had two different body types. My grandfather was a tall, robust person, and my grandmother was a short, thin person. So for her, the health impact came with bone damage. For her, the health impact came with her becoming very sensitive to the food she eats. So she was very mindful, and she, anyways, being a very thin person, she will be a very sensitive person to any small amount of toxic thing that is present in her food. Anything that gives a little bit also of health harm to her, she's sensitive to it while consuming the food. So for her impact was happening via she slowly started eating certain foods that were causing health harm to her. And with my grandfather, he didn't stop eating the food, but his symptoms were manifesting on the skin. He also had in one time when he was earlier, when he was even in his 60s, he was an active person. So around that time in his 50s or 60s, one time he went and climbed a tree to get some fruits for my mother, because my mother was going to come for vacation, and some ripe guavas were there in the tree. So he went to pick and pluck those fruits. So while plucking those fruits, he fell from the tree. Now, while someone falls, we don't usually reflect what can be the conditions of our fall, because when you are active earlier, you don't take into consideration that one day you may not be as active, one day you may not be as strong. But while he didn't reflect on it, I also never reflected on this thing at that time, because I was a kid. But now when I think about it, some factors that could have impacted his motility and mobility problems that led him to fall, some was maybe because he was heavier than the branch in which he was standing to take the fruit. But the other factor is he was also living in a house where we had some cockroach problems. So they were definitely using pesticides in that home. And regular exposure to pesticides being sprayed in our homes doesn't simply stay in our walls or in our corners of the room where we are spraying the pesticide. It also goes into our clothes, again, either directly or indirectly. Directly it goes into our clothes of whichever area we sprayed, because some of it stays in the air, and from the air particulate matter it will transport into your bed, into your curtains, because we don't really have large rooms in Indian homes, right? So any time you spray something in the air, spray something near the bed also, it will invariably, some micro particles will land on your bed. So that's another cause of his skin irritation. Again, if it is landing on his bed, landing in our skin, landing on our clothes, when we are washing those clothes, though that wash water goes into our underground water supply and is invariably again contaminating our water. So there is this feedback loop of continuous water pollution elements being added into the water. More and more we stay in an area, and more chemicals that we add to our daily life, they all add to our chemical pollution of that place. And from that chemical pollution, if again that water is used for washing our clothes, it again comes back to our clothes. It doesn't stay simply in the water, it comes back into our clothes, it comes back into our skin, it's getting absorbed into our skin. Because what did my grandfather die of? He died eventually in his sleep from a cerebral attack where he had cerebral hemorrhage. And if you had pesticides in your environment that were regularly being used, rodenticides that were being used, rodenticides and pesticides have the capacity to thin your blood depending on what chemical was being used, and that thinning of that blood caused by these rodenticides and pesticides, if they were circulating in your even just simply by spraying in your neighborhood, or if they were present inside your food and water, you have absorbed it via the food and water, and it goes eventually somewhere. It had to have an effect. For him it had an effect in his brain functions and causing hemorrhage for him, and he died in his sleep. He was hospitalized, and they tried to recover him, but essentially because the attack happened while he was asleep, even though they took him to the doctor, how many hours later they took him to a hospital, we don't know. Because while you are experiencing it in your sleep, you can't explain, right, what is happening to you. People don't know your health trajectory. My grandmother also had a paralytic attack and cerebral attack, but her attack happened in the daytime when people were observing her. So she was taken sooner to the hospital, and she recovered partially from it, but she still had some paralysis in her body. She still had bone damages also that happened from falling when she was doing normal activities that she used to do in her younger age. But this increase in falls for her that happened during her later part of her life, the paralysis that happened during the latter part of her life, she passed away another 8-10 years after my grandfather passed away. But in those 8-10 years also, she had a painful life in the last 4-5 years of her life because of bone fractures, because of paralysis, because of other health impacting factors, which were again just based on the simple daily things that were happening in her life. Because paralysis can also happen from pesticide uses, paralysis and bone fracturing can happen, and motility functions can get impacted when there is enough pesticide accumulation in our body that our mobility is impacted. So you can have the same thing which impacted my grandfather's health also, but in a mild way, where he only got a hip fracture when he fell from a tree. The same thing impacted my grandmother more because and she had multiple fractures in her body because she was a thinner person and she had a longer exposure than my grandfather. Also because she lived longer. So if you have lived 8 years longer, your exposure to the chemicals is 8 years longer. If you have lived 8 years longer and you are also a thinner person, the degree of chemicals in your bloodstream is also higher than if you are a fatter person in some ways. So if you are thin, there is some advantages to it. If you are thin, there are some disadvantages also when you are getting exposed to harmful chemicals in your environment. So for her death was more painful. My grandfather had a relatively painless death by dying immediately within a few days of his health incident, which was a mercy for him in a way. If you actually look at it, death which is instant or quick is merciful death, whereas death which is long term and prolonged is a very cruel death, not just for the person who is suffering but also for their family who are seeing them suffer. So she had a prolonged cruel death happen to her, and again the circumstances in her daily lifestyle is what caused her death. Now there is more to the story which I will post in another video, because this is again a long video, because again same conditions of social conditioning that are impacting their health now has doubled up when it was impacting their next generation's health, and has tripled up when it is impacting my generation's health. And imagine the health of the children who are being born now or being raised now, how much of those factors have now quadrupled to impact their health. So this reflection is needed by all of us, this information is needed by all of us, so that we can change the trajectory of poor health that is manifesting in many of us at a much younger age than it was manifesting in the times of our grandparents or parents. But even then, in my parents, whatever good health my grandparents had, that good health, those good health supportive factors have been lesser in my parents' time. Many bad health impact happened to many of my family who are my mother's generation, and some of them died and some of them are still suffering. Likewise, many things that have caused people to die even now from the pandemic, irrespective of age, if those factors that are impacting those people's health are not gone from the lives of the people who are still alive, the trajectory of health is going in a decline only rather than a positive direction, because we can only go to a positive direction when the right changes to support our health are made in our daily lives. And each of us has to do some collective, some individual awareness level you have to increase, but after that you have to also do some collective family practices, collective social and society and community practices, and also some collective national to global level practices. Otherwise, this problem that people think, if I'm narrating the story about India, that it is not happening to you in America or another country, is absolutely false. It is still happening to you, but in a different way, from different chemicals being used in the place where you are living. But chemical pollution is not going away until people stop using the chemicals that is adding to earth's and body's chemical pollution. So I hope this was insightful. If you have any questions, please drop a comment. I would be happy to answer them. Thank you.